Hi, I'm Gill from the Run Testers, and this is my review of the Altra Vanish Tempo. It's meant to be the plate-free training partner to the Vanish Carbon, which Nick reviewed recently. I guess in the same way that the Nike Next Percent Tempo with the footpod was the kind of training partner to the Alpha Fly. So let's see what it has to offer. The Vanish Tempo comes in at 222 grams or 7.8 ounces in a women's size 7, which is what I was running in. Looking at the official weights on Altra's website, it seems that the Tempo is about 20 grams heavier than the carbon version of it. So you're getting 20 grams more weight in your training shoe than your racing shoe. The stack height is pretty standard. It's 33 millimeters, but that's the same at the front and the back because, as with all Altra shoes, it is zero drop, and that's the same stack height again as the carbon version of the shoe, so you're training in exactly the same stack height. The midsole is something called Ego Pro, which is Altra's kind of expanded foam TPU offering, so it's not a P-Bax like some other trainers. Now, I'm learning about this stuff, so come with me on this, but basically from what I can tell, TPU is usually longer lasting, but P-Bax tends to have a lot more energy return, but will compress and lose its life maybe a bit quicker, but it does tend to be a lot springier. From what I can tell, it seems to have these two layers on the sole of the shoe. It's got a kind of a slightly softer layer of that Ego Pro foam on the top, just under your foot, and then a slightly harder layer towards the outsole of it. The actual outsole itself is a durable hardened EVA rubber. Now, that's not kind of the hardest of substances, and I'll kind of check that out on more running, but as yet it doesn't look like there's going to be much wear happening on that, and there's plenty of coverage on it as well, so you're not going to get into that Ego Pro foam very quickly. There's always going to be that outsole buffer zone. Fit-wise, I'd say it's just about on the roomier end of the spectrum. So I'm a size 7, and that is absolutely fine for me in this. I maybe could have got away with a 6.5, but I suspect that feeling of roominess is actually to do with the foot-shaped toe box that Altra specialise in, which just makes you feel like you've got a bit more room for your toes, understandably. Altra have this down as a slim fit shoe, so if you're used to their kind of much wider shoes, then you might want to bear that in mind. Personally, it didn't feel like a slim fit to me. I think the depth is something to bear in mind maybe more, in that there's not actually that much kind of depth for your toes. So if you've got particularly kind of tall feet as well, then you might find that that's an issue. But I certainly found them particularly comfortable in a size 7. Also, it's got a sort of lattice line of rubber which holds your foot into place. So actually, and it's kind of linked in with the lacing system. So although the toe box is very wide and very roomy, there was no problem at all for me of kind of moving around in the shoe. The lockdown is great, and it really did hold my feet in place. The heel counter is pretty substantial. There's plenty of cushioning around the ankle, and it holds you in place really well. That's a bit different again to the carbon plate one, which is much, much lighter and kind of incredibly flexible around the heel. However, the tongue was the one place I had a problem. It, to me, looks quite lightweight, like the kind of thing you'd find in a racing shoe. It's also quite short, and I found that it rubs if I wear no-show socks, because it kind of just comes in right at the top of my ankle. So if you are a big person for wearing no-show socks, you might want to bear that in mind, wear something a little bit higher. I don't quite know why they've left it so short. It's not a race shoe. They don't need to cut out every single bit of weight, so that's an odd one for me. My main gripe, though, I have to admit, which I'd noted down long before I saw Nick's review, but I have exactly the same problem, is that the laces constantly come undone unless you like double or triple knot them. I use these to walk for the school run, and 3 times in a third of a mile they came undone, and I had to keep doing them up, to the point that my little boy was having a complaint at me for the fact that I was constantly stopping to retie my laces. And I would say that I'm generally fairly competent when it comes to tying laces. I do it quite a lot. So very odd. So it's definitely a double or triple knot kind of job. So the most important thing then, how do they run? Well, the first run, I have to admit, was a real surprise. I thought these would be fine, but I didn't think that they would necessarily be particularly poppy. But they were. They felt really poppy on the first run. So my first thing I did with them was a pretty hard session, really. 20 times, 1 minute on, 1 minute off. So hard, steady, hard, steady. And I had an absolute blast. I didn't think about the shoes, but I felt like I was running really well, got some great paces. Me and my mates had had a great time. It really flowed. And yeah, they were really poppy, and the rocker on them really helped push me forward on that kind of 1 minute on, 1 minute off. The shoes really kept up with the pace, and they didn't feel like zero drop at all. So I was really excited by them. The next session I did with them was a 4 times 5k session. So 2 really hard 5Ks with recovery in between, and then a park run and another 5k afterwards. We've just taken the Altra Vanish Tempo out for a spin at park run. Well, I did 2 by 20 minutes 5k first with 3 minutes recovery, and then in a very old battered pair of 4%, Nike 4%, and then switched to the Altra Vanish Tempo. It's quite windy here, so I hope you can hear me. I thought that my 4% were battered and not giving me anything. I did a 20 times 1 by 1 minute off, 20 times 1 minute off, 1 minute off the other day in the tempos. Really liked them, thought they were surprisingly springy and responsive. And then switched from the 4% into the tempos for this park run. And I don't know whether it was because I battered my legs beforehand, but it just felt like the return wasn't there. They're comfy. They weren't as soft as I remembered from the other session as well. So I'm going to give them a bit more testing. I was really surprised how solid then the Altras really felt, and how I felt like they weren't pushing me on then, and I almost stopped and switched them out, but I persevered, and I did get a really decent time, having done 2 hard 5Ks already. So that's a bit tricky. I think perhaps the issue there is maybe that zero drop. So although it feels like they've got a rocker, they are still zero drop, and when you switch from something with a really aggressive push forward, like even a really old battered pair of race shoes that have that kind of heel to toe drop, then you really notice the difference. If you're really comfortable with zero drop and you're used to using them, then I suspect that you wouldn't notice that as much, and actually you will still benefit from that rocker aspect of the shoe. But since then I've done some easy runs in them, and they were perfectly pleasant. They don't feel super cushy, so you wouldn't want to, use them as your like really easy day shoes. And then I've done some tempo stuff in them, which was again fine, kind of long tempo stuff. Again, I feel like there's other shoes that I would choose first. They didn't feel as poppy, funnily enough, as in those shorter reps. So it's a tricky one. I'm really in 2 minds. They surprised me on that first run, and then I've kind of slightly reined back how I feel about them. I think, again, perhaps a lot of that is to do with that zero drop, but yeah, I definitely will keep using them. So my initial verdict on the Vanish Tempo is that I've really enjoyed having that extra space in the toe box. I know Altra are keen not to be kind of pigeonholed into that market of the sort of foot-friendly shoes only and not performance shoes, but that is something I've really enjoyed, and I've found that actually the snugness of the rest of the fit has been brilliant, and it's been a really enjoyable shoe to run in from that point of view. I'm in 2 minds about what I'd use the shoe for. At £175, I don't know, they seem quite expensive for something which I'm not quite sure what I'd use it for. There are comparable shoes which are cheaper on the market, like the Speed 3 for £165, or even you can pick up sometimes the Nike Tempo Next Percents, or sort of there's plenty of other shoes that would kind of be a good tempo shoe. But they've got me interested enough in Altra to really think that they're worth paying attention to, and that I'd be interested to try some more of their shoes. And I think they've definitely got something great to work with. So maybe not quite hitting it out the park straight away, but they'll definitely, I'll keep running in them. I'm just not quite sure which one's for at the moment.